I'd like to come back now to Frank Glockner, the oldest of the 7 children. Frank, as I told you earlier, had lost his wife in this terrible accident. And I know my grandmother took care of his son Frank, and I'm going to have to refer to the names of all of the children in Frank's family, but Frank had 6 children that lived, and Mary Aquina, who I heard much about, lived in Indianapolis, Indiana. It was interesting that Frank's mother-in-law took all these children back to Lawrenceburg, where she had lost her husband and had had a store and I think a grocery store, and she ran that store and raised his family. And she was very much interested in all those children having the best possible education she could afford to give them. So I know Mary, I believe, ended up being a school teacher and an old maid and died in Indianapolis. Herbert Joseph, who went to California, but he married a Helen Rose Staub, S-T-A-U-B, from Lawrenceburg, Indiana, and of course they had 4 children. Gertrude, who married a Walker, and his only son, Francis Herbert, who is known as a nickname by the name of Buzz, B-U-S, and Buzz was had gone overseas prior to World War II, as I understand, and worked in Saudi Arabia, and came back to the States and enlisted and was in a construction battalion in the Navy. And when he came out of service, he went back and finished his college and went into the general contracting business on his own. And I didn't meet him until the last 8 years, and I have a wide acquaintance of automobile dealers around the country, and happen to know the Cadillac dealer on the West Coast, who couldn't say enough good things about Buzz Glockner. And Buzz married May Rhea DeLong, and they have 4 children. And but going back to Gertrude has 2 children, son James Robert and Elizabeth Ann, and like I say, Buzz has 4 children, a son Donald Herbert, who lives in Seattle, Washington, and is a CPA and has been in the publishing business, and only has 1 daughter by his marriage. And Lois Jean married a Tom Michaels, and they have 3 children, a son and 2 daughters. And Linda Sue married a Stornetta, John Stornetta, and they have 3 children, a boy and 2 girls. And then their youngest daughter, Kathy, has never married and lives up in Oregon. By the way, Lois Jean and her husband Tom Michaels live in Days Creek, Oregon. They're ranch people and timber. They're in the timber business. And Linda Sue's husband is associated with the phone company. And Kathy is a has been teaching in the grade school system and is now in a college level of teaching in the Oregon area. Then Margaret Mary, who had been injured in an accident, never married, and she passed away in 1986. And Barbara Louise married George Gowen, and they have four children, and Christy Marie, and who married a Sadler, and Joyce Louise, who married a Dunn, Dave Dunn, and Steve Craig, who married Sarah Stouffer, and I think he's in the state of Kansas and is a teacher. And Leslie Diane is married to Daniel Young. And that takes care of, I think, all of Herb Glockner's children. Then we come over, and there are two daughters of Frank's by the name of Gertrude Amelia, who never married and died in 1938 at the age of 38. Christine Mildred Glockner was born in 1895, died in 1930, never married at the age of 35. William Charles, William married an Olga Doss, who was from Arkansas. They have one daughter, Lynn Amelia. William was a veterinarian and worked for the government all his life and lived all over the South. And I never met him, but in later years, my father and his sister Helen and my mother had several visits with them down in Louisville. And of course, Bill and his wife are both deceased. Lynn married a Dalcom, and he works for the state of Kentucky, and they have two daughters that are college age. And I guess Frank Aloysius is the only one that I really got to know back in the late 1940s and early 50s. He came back with his wife and Irene and bought some cars from us, and they have four children. They have their daughter June. Irene married Ed Unger. Ed was from San Francisco, ended up being sales manager of 3M Corporation, and lived in Minneapolis, Minnesota until the last few years, and they moved to Phoenix, Arizona, where they've retired. They have five children. I know one daughter lives in New Zealand and has a family, I believe, of three. They have a younger son that is not married, that lives in the Minneapolis area. I'm almost afraid to say anymore. They have a daughter, Jane, and Cynthia, and Marie Ann, and one of those girls lives on the continent, married I believe a Hollander, and another daughter lives in the Boulder, Colorado area, and the other daughter is still single and lives in the San Francisco area. I think that then There's Frank Aloysius, who we call Wink, who has a son and a daughter, and he lives in South Laguna Beach, California. And they had a son, David, who was born in 1931, was killed in 1953 in a pedestrian car accident. And their youngest son, James Joseph, who was heavy in real estate. And by the way, Frank was in real estate in the California area, and in the Los Angeles area, I should say. And his son Jim followed in that footsteps, but Jim died April the 10th of 1987. And he was quite a character, and we really all enjoyed him. He never married, never had any children. So the only offspring of are from the two marriages, June and Frank, of Frank's family. So that covers Frank Glockner, the oldest son of Bernard and Magdalena. Now I'll take you over to Anna Glockner, who married Adolph Myers, M-E-Y-E-R-S. And I did get to know them as a young boy, and was always interested in them. Adolph Meyer was a meat cutter and had butcher shops, and I know that he once lived in Lexington, Kentucky, and came back to Portsmouth, and I know Sister Aquin influenced him in coming to Rochester, Minnesota, and Ann and Adolph had 4 children, and they had Mary Myers, and she had no children. Magdalena, called her Lena, Elizabeth Myers, died at the age of 19 and had no children. Charlie Myers died at was born in 1882 and died in 1950 and had no offspring. Louise Meyer was the same way, had no offspring, never married. And then we come to Adolph Meyer, who had 4 children, and the oldest one was Audrey Gertrude, and she married Chester Castle, and they live in Washington. James F. Meyer died at the age of 20, never married, didn't have any offspring. Audrey, by the way, has 3 children, William Scott Castle and Carol Jean Hyatt, and Kenneth James, and they all live in the state of Washington. Then Robert Meyer, Bob as we call him, has been a rancher and a very successful one in the area of inland Washington, I want to say. I've forgotten where. I want to say Pasco, Washington, but Yakima, Washington. he had beef cattle. I understand from a fellow I flew with in service who knows Bob real well. I've only met Bob once. He's quite a guy. He has a restaurant now and plays around with some race horses. He had 2 daughters by his marriage, and he has Kathleen Fay, who married a Hill, and Roberta Ann, and they have children. And then Shirley, the youngest, married a Pascal Hancock, and she has 2 children, Peter Michael and Tammy Marie. But Shirley's husband died about 4 years ago, and she lives in the Washington area. Probably one of the most colorful people I've ever met, and I met him back in 1967, and was really the person that brought together the Glockners and Portsmouth Glockners and the Myers, and of course we've always had a relationship with Jim Glockner. Has found great interest in his relationship back here, and so over the years the Meyer family has been out of touch, and basically Sister Aquin was the one who really kept the family together. She really was concerned about her brothers and sisters, her brothers and sister, and she really kept up on them. But anyway, it would be an interesting half-hour story to tell how it came about that Bill Meyer and his wife Cecilia what a great pair they were, and they had 2 sons, William B. Meyer, and Bill had a daughter and a son, and he just lost the son right before the end of the year in 1988 of cancer at the age of 37, and he had a family that he left behind, and they have a daughter, Mary Louise, and she has a daughter, Penny Jean. Then Byron Meyer, probably more like his dad than anyone, but I'd like to go back to Bill Meyer, the youngest son of Anna and Adolph. As a young fella, he went out to the West Coast, and he homesteaded land in the Yakima Valley, and he ended up was quite an adventurer, I guess, and he stowed away on a ship during the gold rush days, the late 90s, up into Alaska, and didn't have a thing financially, and I guess they found him aboard ship, but he had quite a personality. But he ended up staying up in the gold rush, and I guess he made a little money and came back down to the Yakima Valley and moved his mother and family and father and the family out into that area, and they set out a apple orchard, and they were quite sizable farmers, wheat and cattle farmers, and I know they leased land from the Indian reservation that's close by them, and Byron has told some good stories, and I hope that he tapes some of his because they really are interesting. His son Byron has married Glenna May O'Leary, and they have 2 sons, Timothy Francis and he has two sons, David Byron and Alex D. And Scott Phillip is still living at home and is a well-educated young man, but really hasn't caught on to what he wants to do yet. So that takes care of Anna Glockner and her family. Of course, Louise Glockner became Sister Ackwin, and Sister Ackwin was quite a person. I'd like to read what was written of her, both in the history of this order and her obituary, which one of the sisters just sent me, taken out of the archive files of the Rochester Franciscans. But she died in 1941 and at the age of 83, and she had fallen and broken her hip and was quite a large woman, but very learned, very stern. And I know as a young boy when she'd come home on visits, I was just real scared of her. And I know she was home for a visit one time when Anna and Adolph Meyer were here visiting, and it was interesting for me to listen to them visit, although I didn't remember all of the stories. But I know in listening to Sister Ackwin talk about relatives and first cousins once removed and second cousins and double cousins, and just infatuated me. And she's really responsible for the family tree and the genealogy that we have on the Glockner family, because on her 25th anniversary of her profession as a nun, her brothers gave her a gift of a trip to Europe. And she went back to Bingen-Baden, and of course she spoke and read German. And she looked up all of the baptismal records that there at the little church in Bingen-Baden. And she brought all this information back, but no one did anything with it until 1969, when my father and my brother sat down and put all this format of this family tree together, which I hope all of you have and are keeping, because there aren't many families that have the perpetuation and the knowledge of their ancestry and its lineage that we have. It was my experience for my brother Dave and I, and my wife Joanne and I 2 years ago this month, to have gone to Germany. And we went to Bingen-Baden, and of course we don't speak German, we don't read German, but we took the family tree with us, and the deacon at the church that still exists in the little town, and it's very small, I'd say maybe 24 houses. By the way, the Glockner home that was built in the early 1700s is still intact. It's been remodeled since 1970, but the cornerstone is still there, and it's still being lived in. And the last Glockner relative that had ownership of it had adopted a war orphan out of World War II, and they have since deceased, and they left that home to this individual, and we talked with him through an interpreter, and we have pictures of it. And of course we have pictures of it that when Aunt Helen and my Aunt Ann were in Germany probably 12 or 15 years ago, maybe longer than that, before it had been remodeled. So But anyway, the church archives, these people couldn't get over the detail and the authenticity of how well this family tree was put together, and everything we had on there until this those that were born in this country, but all the records on these families are still intact, and it's amazing the how well kept the records are. So that's how we came to having what we have as to our ancestry and our lineage. To finish up on my little story about Sister Ackman, whether you know this or not, the Mayo Clinic was, of course, started by the Mayo brothers as a result of a tornado that had done great devastation to that area. But the Sisters of St. Francis, which Sister Ackman was a very active member of, were instrumental in the development of St. Mary's Hospital, which is about a 1,400 bed hospital, and the Mayo Clinic. And Sister Ackman also had the responsibility. They had members of their order that were having tubercular problems, which was common of the era. She went out to the West Coast and bought property and developed a convalescent home for the tubercular members of their order. And of course, when she was in the West Coast, she was diligent to make sure that her brothers, Frank and Bill, and their offspring were all staying true to their Catholic faith, and if they weren't, she really worked them over. And she had great interest in the preservation of the saving of one another's souls and the honor and glory of God and the love of God. And I know I do not have with me, as I'm sitting here this evening, her obituary, but I will bring that into play later on in my discussion. But before I leave Frank Glockner too far behind, I have a biographical sketch of him was printed in a 1899 history of Scioto County, Portsmouth, Ohio, and I'd like to read it to you. Frank A. Glockner, a son of Bernard and Magdalena Beck Glockner, native of Bingen-Baden, Germany, was born August 26th of 1855 in Portsmouth, Ohio. He attended St. Mary's School and later took a course of study in a business college. He learned the tinner's trade at H. Eberhardt's, and after finishing his trade, assisted his father in the hardware business. His father died in 1876, and he took charge of the business for his mother until 1884. In that year, he moved to Lexington, Kentucky, and was engaged in the shoe business in that place for 5 years. In 1889, he went to Cincinnati for 4 years. He carried on a grocery business. In 1893, he returned to Portsmouth, and since that time has been engaged in the stove and hardware business at 121 and at 1210 and 1230 Gallia Street. On May 15, 1889, he was married to Mary E. Lang of Lawrenceburg, Indiana. She died November the 5th, 1901, at the age of 39. They had 8 children, Magdalene and Frank, who died in infancy, Mary, Herbert, Frank, William, Catherine, and Gertrude. So this is the only written background that we have, and the hearsay that I was told by my family, and my Aunt Helen especially, Aunt Helen Glockner, about the Frank Glockner and the Meyer family and Sister Aquin, Louise Glockner. Now we're down to Alex M. Glockner, who I am an offspring of, who was my grandfather. And I think I'll just start off with the biographical sketch that was written in the 1899 history of Scioto County. Alex Martin Glockner was born April 9th, 1866 in Portsmouth, Ohio, the son of Bernard Glockner and Magdalena Beck Glockner. His father came to America in 1847 and his mother in 1853. They were married in 1854. He received his early education in St. Mary's Catholic School, which he attended for 6 years, at the end of which time he entered his mother's hardware store to work, but he did not like it, and learned the molder's trade, at which he worked for 5 years. He then took a course in the Portsmouth Business College and again entered the hardware store owned and conducted by his mother. His father engaged in the hardware business in 1872, succeeding John B. Rottinghouse. He died October 27th, 1876, and the business was conducted in the name of his mother, Mrs. M. Glockner, until October 22nd, 1891, when she died. The business was then purchased by